The school's beloved teacher smiles for parents, but Rex won't stop barking. He smells a secret no adult can see. When the truth finally breaks, every parent in Oakridge wishes they'd listened to the dog first. The morning sun spilled through the tall windows of Oakridge Elementary, warming the polished floors and filling the hallways with the usual noise of backpacks bouncing, sneakers squeaking, and children laughing as they hurried to class. Parents lingered by the doors, chatting with teachers and hugging their kids goodbye, the kind of easy rhythm that made the world feel safe. In Mrs. Winter's classroom, everything looked perfectly normal. Neat rows of desks, cheerful posters of multiplication tables and smiling cartoon owls, and the smell of chalk dust mixed with freshly sharpened pencils. But at the back of the room, one thing was not normal. Rex, the German Shepherd canine, known across the county for his calm presence, would not sit still. His ears were pinned forward, his muscles tight under his vest, and his amber eyes were locked on the teacher, with a focus so sharp it made Officer Daniel Hayes shift uncomfortably. A low growl rumbled from Rex's chest, steady and unyielding, the kind that came from instinct rather than training. At first, a few parents chuckled, trying to smooth the tension. One father whispered that maybe the dog didn't like apples, since Mrs. Winters had just set a shiny red one on her desk. Laughter bubbled in short bursts, uneasy, but Hayes didn't join in. He had worked with Rex for 3 years, had seen him track a missing child through a storm, had watched him sit calm and steady in crowded courtrooms, had trusted him more than most people he knew. This was not nerves, this was not play, and the look in the shepherd's eyes was not confusion. Mrs. Winters laughed too loudly, waving her hands as if brushing the moment aside, her voice higher than usual as she told the children to settle into their seats. Her smile stayed wide, but her knuckles whitened as she gripped the marker at the board. She glanced at Rex once, then quickly looked away, as if staring too long might give something away. Hayes felt the leash strain in his hand as Rex pushed forward, barking once, sharp and deep, a sound that snapped every head toward the back of the room. The windows rattled slightly, and even the clock on the wall seemed to tick louder in the silence that followed. "Easy, boy," Hayes muttered, trying to steady the leash, but Rex refused to back down. The shepherd's paws scraped against the floor as if he were ready to launch, his body angled toward the teacher like she was a target. Children whispered nervously, one little girl covering her ears, another boy asking if the dog was broken. The principal appeared in the doorway with a practiced smile, assuring everyone it was nothing, just overstimulation. Just a working dog reacting to too much noise. Parents nodded, but their eyes flicked between Rex and Mrs. Winters, reading what no one wanted to say out loud. Hayes' chest tightened as he crouched beside his partner, whispering commands that usually brought instant obedience. Rex didn't blink, didn't move, didn't break his stare. His body was a coiled spring, his growl a constant warning, his eyes 2 burning points fixed on the woman at the front of the class. Hayes had seen this look before in raids and dark alleys, in moments when danger hid just behind the surface. It was never wrong. As he straightened slowly, his hand gripping the leash harder, a thought slid into his mind with the weight of certainty. Whatever joke the others wanted to make, Rex wasn't wrong. He was telling them something, and Hayes needed to listen. Rex was not the kind of dog who wasted energy on noise or drama. He had been trained to stay calm in chaos, to sit steady when sirens blared, to ignore shouts and panic, until his handler gave the order to act. In courtrooms, he had lain at Officer Daniel Hayes's feet like a statue, even when strangers whispered and pointed. On search missions through the woods, he had followed scent trails for hours without a single bark, his patience outlasting men twice his size. That was why Hayes felt a weight in his chest as the German Shepherd refused to quiet down, because Rex never barked without cause. This was not restlessness. This was instinct sounding an alarm. Hayes tugged the leash firmly, his voice low but steady, as he gave the command that usually ended everything. "Heel." Rex's ears flicked, but his paws stayed planted against the tile, claws scraping, as if he were bracing himself against being dragged. The growl had turned into short bursts of barking now, loud enough to make children flinch and parents exchange nervous glances. Mrs. Winters froze at the blackboard, the marker squeaking in her trembling hand as she pretended to keep writing. Her smile was stretched too tight, lips thin and pale, her shoulders stiff, like she was holding her breath. Hayes caught the flicker in her eyes, the way she wouldn't look at the dog, the way her hand trembled just slightly before she steadied it again. The principal tried to smooth it over, stepping into the room with a laugh that sounded rehearsed. He told everyone that Rex was just sensitive to the noise, that sometimes working dogs became overstimulated in crowded rooms, and that there was nothing to worry about. Parents nodded slowly, some relaxing, but Hayes didn't move. He had handled Rex long enough to know the difference between a dog reacting to clutter and a dog reacting to danger. Rex's amber eyes weren't darting around the room or scanning the desks. They were locked like a laser on the teacher, unblinking, sharp, steady, as if he saw something that no one else could. Hayes crouched to meet Rex at eye level, his hand resting firmly on the shepherd's harness, his other hand pulling back on the leash. He whispered another command, softer this time, hoping tone alone would do what force could not. Rex's ears twitched again, but his gaze did not break. His body leaned forward, chest low, muscles tight, the stance of a dog who was ready to spring at any moment. Hayes could feel the tension vibrating through the leash, a signal as clear as any spoken word. The dog was not confused. He was certain. Mrs. Winters cleared her throat and finally turned, her smile still fixed, but her voice cracking as she asked the children to open their math books. She acted as though nothing was wrong, but her hands betrayed her, fingers fumbling with the pages, the marker rolling off her desk and clattering loudly to the floor. A few kids giggled, but the sound felt wrong, hollow. Hayes stood again, pulling Rex close, but he could not shake the thought pressing against his mind. This was not a scene. This was a warning, and whatever reason Rex had for refusing to let go of the teacher, it was real. Mark Ellison stood near the back of the classroom, hands shoved deep into the pockets of his worn jacket, trying to look like any other parent waiting for the morning routine to finish. He was used to blending in, used to standing quiet and watching the world unfold around his daughter without drawing too much attention to himself. Lily sat in the front row, her head bent low over her notebook, her pencil scratching out the kind of looping doodles she made whenever she wanted to disappear into her own world. She was small for her age, with wide eyes and hair that always fell into her face, but she had a stubborn streak that reminded Mark of her mother. He let out a slow breath as he watched her, but his eyes kept drifting back to the dog at the back of the room. Rex was not acting like any ordinary animal, not even like a trained police dog. His body was rigid, his eyes locked with unnerving focus, his growl rising and falling like a warning siren only he could hear. Mark's skin prickled, the sound cutting into him in a way he could not explain. Other parents laughed nervously, making small comments about nerves or overstimulation, but none of that landed with him. He knew enough about dogs to understand they did not waste energy on shadows, not a dog like this, not a decorated canine whose reputation reached beyond the county line. This wasn't random. This was deliberate. A memory stirred, sharp and sudden, of his late wife kneeling in the grass behind their old house, brushing the family dog while Lily played nearby. She used to say it over and over, half joking, but always with a quiet kind of certainty. Dogs know. They see the truth we ignore. At the time, Mark would just smile, happy to let her believe it, never thinking those words would echo inside him years later, as he stood in a classroom watching a German shepherd stare down a teacher. He swallowed hard, wishing she was still here, wishing he could lean on her instincts instead of doubting his own. Mrs. Winters' smile stretched across her face like a mask, too wide, too forced, and Mark noticed the way her hand trembled when she reached for the chalk. The other parents were already settling, shifting their attention back to their phones or whispering to each other, eager to move past the awkward moment. But Mark couldn't. His gaze went from Rex's bristling fur to his daughter's small shoulders hunched over her notebook. He felt an ache deep in his chest, a creeping unease that tightened with every bark. He told himself not to overreact, not to read too much into the moment, but the truth pressed against him harder than his denial. Something was wrong, maybe not something he could explain, but something he could feel as clear as the leash straining in Officer Hayes's hands. "Dogs don't lie," his wife's voice whispered in his memory. Mark's jaw clenched as he kept his eyes on Lily. If Rex saw something, then he needed to pay attention, because sometimes instinct was the only warning you got before the world changed forever. The principal's chuckle rolled across the classroom like a forced laugh track on an old television show, loud and hollow, and meant to calm the unease that had settled over every parent and child. He clapped his hands once and told them all not to worry. The canine was simply overstimulated. Too many voices and too much excitement for a working dog to handle. His words carried authority but not weight, the kind of explanation that smoothed surfaces without fixing cracks. Parents nodded quickly, eager to believe, eager to move on from the awkward scene. A few even smiled, trying to shake the tension. Hayes forced a tight smile of his own, murmuring an apology as he tugged hard on Rex's leash. The shepherd resisted, muscles locked, body pulling forward with every ounce of strength he had. Hayes leaned back, planting his heels into the floor, straining to drag the animal away. Rex barked again, the sound booming off the walls, rattling the glass panes in the door, a thunderclap of warning that made children cover their ears. The leash cut into Hayes's hand, and still the dog lunged, trying to return to the classroom as though he knew he was leaving something unfinished. Parents whispered now, half amused, half unsettled, while the principal waved them off and guided everyone's attention back to the front. Finally, Hayes managed to haul Rex through the doorway, the shepherd twisting his body to look back, barking in deep bursts that echoed down the hall. The sound carried long after they had gone, a drumbeat fading but not gone, leaving silence behind that did not feel like relief. Inside the classroom, the air was heavy, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. Children shifted nervously in their seats, pencils rolling across desks, eyes darting toward their teacher, who was suddenly very pale. Mrs. Winters bent down to pick up the chalk that had slipped from her hand. When she stood again, she moved to the blackboard, gripping the eraser with fingers that trembled so badly she nearly dropped it. She began to wipe away the morning's lessons, her strokes uneven, hurried, the white dust clouding into the air. Her smile had vanished, replaced by the thin line of someone holding themselves together through sheer force of will. She told the class to open their books, her voice sharp in a way that silenced the room faster than the principal's reassurances ever could. Mark Ellison watched from the back, his eyes narrowing. He had not laughed when the others did, and he did not laugh now. He saw the way her shoulders tensed, the way her gaze flicked nervously toward the hallway where the barking had faded. He thought of his daughter sitting only a few feet from that desk, head bent low, trusting the grown-ups around her to protect her. His wife's words echoed again like a prayer, "Dogs know." The other parents began to shuffle out, their faces already smoothing back into polite smiles. But Mark stayed frozen, staring at the chalk dust, swirling in the sunlight, and at the hand that trembled too much for comfort. The house was quiet that night, the kind of stillness that usually meant rest. But for Mark Ellison, it carried an edge that kept him from fully settling. He had tucked Lily into bed hours earlier, kissed her forehead, and turned out the light, but he could hear her shifting in her room, soft whimpers escaping between the creaks of the old floorboards. When she cried out, he was already moving, pushing open the door to find her sitting up in bed, clutching her blanket tight against her chest. Her face was pale and damp with sweat, her eyes wide in the dark. She whispered that she had seen Mrs. Winters in her dream, standing in the corner of the classroom with a smile that never reached her eyes. Mark stroked her hair and told her it was just a nightmare, only a dream. But the words felt hollow, even as he said them. He tried to soothe her, brought her a glass of water, and sat on the edge of her bed until her breathing slowed. She finally lay back down, her eyelids heavy but still flickering with unease. He thought she was drifting to sleep, but when he reached to pull the blanket higher, he saw it, faint in the glow of the nightlight, a set of bruises circling her small wrist. The marks were fresh, darkening into purple, the shape too clear to mistake. His chest tightened as he gently turned her hand, careful not to hurt her. She pulled it back quickly, eyes darting away, her lips pressing together like she wanted to swallow the truth. Mark's voice came out lower than he intended, trembling with something between fear and anger. He asked her what happened, if she had fallen, if one of the kids at school had grabbed her during play. Lily shook her head slowly, her eyes welling with tears. When he pressed again, she hesitated, her tiny shoulders curling forward as though she was bracing for something heavy. Finally, she whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. She said it was our secret. The words slammed into Mark harder than any blow. He felt the room spin, the air heavy as stone pressing against his chest. He wanted to believe he had misheard, that Lily was talking about a game, a misunderstanding, anything else. But her eyes told him the truth, wide and afraid, holding something no child should have to carry. His hands shook as he reached for her, pulling her close, feeling the fragile rise and fall of her chest against his. She buried her face in his shirt and sobbed quietly, and he held her until her breathing evened again, whispering promises he wasn't sure how to keep. When she finally slept, clutching his arm like an anchor, Mark sat in the dark, staring at the bruises on her wrist, his wife's words echoing again. Dogs know. Rex had seen what no one else dared to see, and now the cracks in Mrs. Winters's smile were no longer hidden. Something was deeply wrong, and Mark knew he could not ignore it any longer. The morning at Oakridge Elementary started with the same familiar rhythm. The shuffle of sneakers, the buzz of voices, the squeak of markers against whiteboards. No one expected anything unusual, least of all Officer Hayes, who had only brought Rex along for a short demonstration to the fifth graders about police work. Rex wore his vest and walked with the same proud gait he always did, head high and steps measured, the picture of discipline. Hayes had shown him off 100 times in schools, letting the children pet him and watch him perform simple commands. He thought today would be no different, but the moment they stepped into the front hall, the dog changed. Rex froze for half a heartbeat, his ears pricked, his nose flaring. Then he pulled hard, muscles surging as if an invisible line was yanking him forward. Hayes stumbled to keep his balance, surprised by the sudden burst of strength. "Easy," he hissed, tightening his grip on the leash. But Rex wasn't listening. His focus was sharp, his strides quick, dragging his handler down the corridor, past open classroom doors and startled teachers. Students turned to watch, some pointing and laughing, but the shepherd didn't spare them a glance. He was locked on one destination, his instincts carrying him forward with absolute certainty. By the time they reached the far wing of the school, Hayes knew exactly where Rex was headed, and dread pooled in his stomach. Lily's classroom. He dug his heels into the floor, trying to slow the dog. But Rex surged forward anyway, hitting the classroom door with the weight of his body. The bang echoed through the hallway, loud enough to make a few children scream. Then came the barking, deep and furious, rolling through the building like thunder. It wasn't one bark, but a volley, sharp and violent, shaking the glass panels in the door until they rattled against the frame. Inside the room, chaos erupted. Children gasped and ducked, covering their ears, some crying at the sudden noise. Books tumbled from desks. The sound was so powerful it seemed to press against every wall at once. Mrs. Winters stood at the front, coffee in hand, her lesson half written across the board. At the first slam against the door, her face drained of color. When the barking followed, she dropped the cup, the hot liquid splattering across the floor, the ceramic shattering into jagged pieces. Her hand flew to her mouth, but no sound came. For one long moment she just stared at the door, as though something monstrous was about to break through. Then she turned and bolted. No explanation. No effort to calm the children, no attempt to maintain control. She snatched her bag off the desk and hurried out the side door that led to the parking lot, her footsteps sharp against the tile. The children stared after her, wide-eyed and silent. Hayes shoved the door open and pulled Rex inside, the dog still barking, still pushing forward, as if chasing the truth everyone else wanted to deny. Hayes looked at the spilled coffee, at the wide-eyed students, and finally at the empty space where their teacher had been. His pulse hammered in his ears. Whatever Rex had been trying to say all along, he had just said it louder than words ever could. The commotion drew people fast. First, teachers rushing in from nearby rooms, then the principal, his tie askew and his face red as he tried to restore order. The children were huddled at their desks, whispering and pointing, some still shaken by the noise of Rex's barks. Hayes stood firm, one hand tight on the leash, the other raised to quiet the questions that came from every direction. Rex was still restless, pacing back and forth near the teacher's desk, his nose close to the floor, his body tense as if every muscle was urging him forward. Hayes knew that stance too well. The shepherd was alerting. "I need this room cleared," Hayes said, his voice sharp enough to cut through the confusion. The principal began to argue, muttering something about disruption and procedure, but Hayes shut him down with a look. Now, teachers ushered the students out into the hall, some covering their mouths in shock, others hurrying the children along so quickly a few dropped their books. When the room was empty, Rex darted toward the back corner, his nails clicking against the tile, his nose pressing to the side of a locked cabinet. He barked once, then dropped to a low whine, pawing at the door. Hayes crouched down, pressing his hand to the cabinet, feeling Rex's urgency like a vibration under his palm. "You smell something, don't you, boy?" he muttered. Rex scratched harder, his tail stiff, his eyes bright with intensity. Hayes stood and motioned for one of the officers who had arrived in the hall. "Get this open." The officer hesitated, pointing out the lock, but Hayes was already pulling a crowbar from the supply kit kept for emergencies. The metal shrieked as it tore against the wood. With one hard push, the cabinet door swung open. The smell of dust and paper filled the room, but what lay inside froze everyone where they stood. Stacks of children's notebooks, some with names written in uneven handwriting, others with doodles and stickers that only kids would use. Alongside them were folders, photographs tucked into envelopes, and a phone buzzing faintly, as if it had just been silenced. Hayes picked it up with a gloved hand, his stomach tightening as the screen lit up to reveal messages no teacher should ever send, words that should never exist between an adult and a child. His jaw locked as he scrolled, bile rising in his throat. Behind him, Rex growled again, low and steady, as if guarding the evidence itself. The room had gone quiet, except for the hum of the overhead lights and the faint tap of rain against the windows. One of the younger officers muttered a curse under his breath. Another whispered that this couldn't be real. But Hayes knew better. Dogs didn't lie, and Rex had led them straight to the truth. He slipped the phone into an evidence bag, his hands steady, though his heart was pounding. When he looked down at Rex, the shepherd's eyes met his, unflinching, certain. Instinct had become evidence, and now no one could ignore what had been hiding in plain sight. The call for federal support went out faster than anyone expected, the weight of what had been found in that cabinet spreading like fire through the department. By the time the sun dipped low behind the schoolyard trees, black SUVs had pulled into the lot, and agents in dark jackets stepped into the building with calm precision. At the front of the group was Agent Cassidy Reynolds, a woman whose presence silenced even the loudest voices. She carried herself with the sharpness of someone who had seen too much and still refused to look away. Oakridge remembered her name from the case that had nearly broken the town months before, the one that exposed powerful men and hidden crimes. She had been there in the worst hours, steady as stone, and now here she was again, called back into shadows that refused to stay buried. Rex was waiting near the classroom, sitting stiffly but with eyes that never wavered from the hall where Mrs. Winters was being held. His breathing was steady, but his body tense, ears pricked, tail stiff as a rod. Reynolds crouched in front of him, studying him with the kind of seriousness most people reserved for suspects. Hayes gave a quick rundown of the morning, how Rex had broken formation, dragged him to the door, and barked until the walls shook. He explained about the hidden cabinet, the notebooks, the photos, the phone, each detail heavier than the last. Reynolds listened without interrupting, her eyes moving between the officer and the dog, then finally drifting to the woman sitting on a bench under watch. Mrs. Winters tried to maintain her composure, her hair smoothed back, her hands folded tightly in her lap, but her face was pale, her jaw clenched, her gaze darting away whenever Rex shifted. Reynolds caught it immediately. A flinch so small, most would miss it, but not her. She straightened and spoke with quiet certainty. He's not barking at random. He's alerting. He knows she's guilty. The words settled over the hall like a final verdict. Some of the local officers exchanged uneasy glances, still clinging to doubt, but Hayes felt something solidify inside him. All the times he had defended Rex, all the trust he had put into the dog's instincts, now echoed back with force. He wasn't just a handler. He was a witness to truth delivered without words. Reynolds ordered the evidence to be collected and catalogued, her team moving with practiced efficiency. She questioned Hayes quickly, then turned her attention back to Rex, her expression softening just slightly. "You found her out, didn't you?" she murmured. Rex's ears flicked, his gaze cutting once more toward Mrs. Winters, a low growl building in his chest. The teacher looked away, her fingers tightening until her knuckles went white. For the first time, the parents who lingered nearby began to whisper less about misunderstanding and more about betrayal. A trusted teacher, a friendly smile, a mask cracking under the stare of a dog who refused to be fooled. Reynolds signaled for Mrs. Winters to be taken into custody, her voice firm as steel. Hayes tightened his grip on Rex's leash, but the shepherd didn't lunge this time. He sat tall, eyes locked on the woman as she was led away, the truth clear in every silent second. The interrogation room at the station was never meant for children. Yet Lily sat there with her legs dangling from the chair, her sneakers swinging nervously as her hands clutched a piece of drawing paper from her school bag. She had been scribbling on it since she arrived, little swirls and flowers pressed so hard into the paper that the tip of her pencil broke twice. Mark sat beside her, his hand on her shoulder, whispering that she didn't have to say anything she didn't want to. But Agent Reynolds knelt across from her, with a patience that softened the edges of the room. She didn't ask questions right away. She just let the silence breathe until Lily finally raised her tear-stained face. The little girl's lips trembled as she began, her words spilling out between shaky breaths. She said, "Mrs. Winters had spoken to her after class more than once, offering to drive her home so she wouldn't have to wait for her dad, promising candy and little gifts if she agreed. She said she always felt strange about it, that her stomach would twist in knots when the teacher leaned close. She had kept quiet, because Mrs. Winters told her it was their secret, and secrets, she was told, were proof of friendship." Her small hands clenched around the paper, smearing the colors as her tears soaked the page. Mark's throat tightened as he listened, his heart breaking with every word. He had always told himself that Lily was safe at school, that the worst of their pain had already passed with the loss of her mother. Now he realized danger had been closer than he ever imagined, wrapped in the disguise of someone trusted by all. He fought to keep his voice calm as he asked Lily why she hadn't told him sooner. She ducked her head, whispering that she was scared he wouldn't believe her, that everyone liked Mrs. Winters and said she was kind. Agent Reynolds leaned forward then, her voice steady but warm, assuring Lily that she was brave for speaking, that none of this was her fault, and that secrets like those were never safe to keep. She asked if Lily remembered anything else, anything that felt out of place. For a moment the girl was silent, her pencil hovering over the wet paper. Then she spoke again in a voice so soft, Mark almost missed it. She said Mrs. Winters smelled like something she recognized, something that made her skin crawl. She paused, her eyes flicking up toward her father. She smelled like the man from Mommy's accident, she whispered. The words hit Mark like ice water. His blood ran cold, his body rigid in the chair as the memory of that night came rushing back. The crash, the chaos, the scent of cologne that clung to the stranger who appeared at the scene before vanishing. He had buried that detail deep, never wanting to dwell on it. Now, hearing it from his daughter's mouth, tied to the teacher who sat under arrest, the pieces began to align in a way that made him sick. Reynolds locked eyes with him, her face grim, already thinking ahead. Mark pulled Lily close, holding her against his chest as his mind spun with fear and fury. Whatever web Mrs. Winters was part of, it reached far beyond one classroom, and his daughter had been caught in its shadow. The plan was set in motion quietly, with no announcements and no flashing lights. Just a shift in the air as the FBI team spread themselves across Oakridge like shadows. Mrs. Winters was released under the guise of cooperation, her wrists free, her tone clipped but steady as she walked out of the station. To the untrained eye, she looked like a teacher caught in an unfortunate misunderstanding, but the agents knew better. They had Lily's words, they had the notebooks and the phone, and most importantly, they had Rex. The shepherd had already proven he could see through masks, and now his instincts would guide them to wherever the truth was hiding. Agent Reynolds gave the order to let her move unhindered, and the team fell into place. Unmarked vehicles trailed at a distance, radios crackling softly with updates. Hayes walked Rex on a long lead, pretending it was nothing more than a late patrol, but his eyes never left the dog. The shepherd's nose twitched constantly, his body alert, tracking the fading scent of the woman who had slipped into a car and driven toward the woods. Mark rode in silence in the back of another vehicle, his hands knotted into fists, knowing his daughter's testimony had set all of this into motion. When Mrs. Winters's car pulled off the main road and onto a narrow dirt path, the agents tensed. The woods behind the school were thick, tangled with undergrowth and forgotten trails that locals avoided after dark. The car crawled deeper until the trees swallowed it from view. Reynolds lifted her hand, and the team fanned out, leaving the vehicles behind. Hayes unclipped Rex's leash and whispered a single command. The dog surged forward without hesitation, muscles rippling under his vest as he followed the trail through brush and briars. His ears stayed locked ahead, his nose dragging low to the ground, pulling Hayes deeper into the silence of the forest. The walk stretched on, the crunch of leaves and the occasional snap of a twig the only sounds. Then Rex stiffened. His hackles rose, and a growl hummed through his chest. He veered left, pushing through a cluster of trees, and there it was. A cabin, half-rotted but standing, hidden under the cover of vines and shadows. Its windows were boarded, smoke curling faintly from a crooked chimney, and a single light glowed behind the cracks in the boards. Reynolds signaled for silence, her hand resting on her holster, her eyes scanning every angle. Through the trees, they saw Mrs. Winters step out of her car and hurry toward the door, glancing over her shoulder once before slipping inside. Rex let out a sharp bark and lunged forward, pulling Hayes with him, eager to close the distance. Hayes held him back with effort, whispering reassurance, but the dog's intent was clear. Whatever secrets the teacher thought she had carried safely here, Rex had found them. The team spread into positions around the cabin, the air thick with anticipation. Inside they could hear muffled voices, hurried movements, the shuffle of papers. Mark stood a few paces back, heart pounding, watching the place that had nearly swallowed his daughter's world whole. The trap was closing, and at the very center of it was a German shepherd whose instincts refused to be ignored. The cabin smelled of damp wood and stale smoke, the kind of place where secrets fester rather than hide. The agents moved in first, weapons drawn, their flashlights cutting through the shadows as dust floated like mist in the beams. Hayes stayed close behind with Rex, the shepherd's nose working furiously, his muscles taut, every step a promise that he knew what waited inside. The floor creaked under their boots as they swept the narrow hallway. A door slammed ahead, hurried footsteps pounding across the boards. Rex lunged, his bark exploding in the small space, echoing off the walls until it sounded like thunder. They burst into the main room, and the truth lay scattered across the table. Piles of documents, foreign passports with different names but the same faces, stacks of cash bound tight with rubber bands. A laptop sat open, its screen glowing with paused footage so vile no one wanted to be the first to press play. Agent Reynolds picked up a folder, her jaw tightening as she flipped through photographs that connected directly to the evidence Sarah Mitchell had died chasing months before. This wasn't just a teacher moonlighting in crime. This was part of something much larger, a web already traced back to Thomas Blackwood, the man whose name still carried weight like poison in Oakridge. Mrs. Winters stood near the corner, her back pressed against the wall, her eyes darting like a trapped animal. Gone was the polished smile of the classroom. Her hair clung to her forehead with sweat, her lips pale and cracked. She muttered excuses under her breath, words tripping over each other, swearing it wasn't what it looked like, that she was being forced, that none of it was her choice. But Rex wasn't fooled. He stepped forward, hackles bristling, a low growl rumbling from deep inside his chest. His teeth glinted under the flashlight beams, his body angled to strike. She froze, her hands lifting as if the gesture might calm him. The agents didn't move, not yet, watching the standoff unfold. Rex advanced another step, his eyes locked on hers with the same relentless focus that had exposed her in the classroom. His bark tore through the cabin, sharp and final, the sound of judgment. She flinched and slid down the wall, her back hitting the floor as she scrambled against the boards. Her mask had cracked for good, every ounce of charm stripped away, leaving only panic. Reynolds gave the order then, her voice steady and cold. The agents surged forward, snapping cuffs around the woman's wrists as she screamed and tried to twist free. The table shook as one officer slammed a hand on the evidence to keep it from spilling to the ground. Hayes pulled Rex back, his grip tight, though the shepherd never took his eyes off her until she was dragged to her feet and secured. The room was heavy with the weight of proof, every paper and photograph another nail in the coffin of a lie. Mark Ellison stepped in, his face pale as he took it all in. He thought of Lily, of the bruises on her wrist, of the fear in her voice when she whispered about the smell she remembered. His stomach turned, but his voice was steady as he spoke. She wasn't a teacher, he said. She was hunting children. Rex gave one last growl, low and fierce, then sat down at Hayes's side, his job done. In that silence, the truth was undeniable. The unmasking was complete, and the world now saw the predator hiding behind the smile of a trusted face. The school gym had never been so full, its bleachers packed with parents and children, teachers and officers, all gathered under the bright lights that made the polished floor gleam. Banners that usually carried messages about sports and graduations now hung beside a hastily made sign that read, "Thank you, Rex," in bold letters drawn by the students themselves. The chatter of voices filled the air until Agent Reynolds stepped to the microphone and called for quiet. Her voice carried the weight of what had been uncovered, the crimes exposed, the children protected, but she did not linger on the darkness. Instead, she spoke of courage, of the unshakable loyalty of a German shepherd who had seen through what the rest of them had missed. At the center of it all, Rex sat tall, his vest brushed clean, his amber eyes steady as he scanned the crowd. He did not fidget or whine, he simply waited, as though he knew the gathering was not about noise or spectacle but about truth. Beside him stood Officer Hayes, his hand resting on the leash but his face softer than anyone had ever seen it. He had worked with many dogs, but none like this one, and he knew deep down that without Rex, the story would have ended very differently. Parents clapped and cheered as Reynolds listed the names of the children who were now safe, their lives protected, because a dog had refused to stay silent. The sound rolled across the gym like a wave, and yet through it all, Rex never flinched. His eyes drifted toward the front row, where Lily sat with her father. She wore a bright ribbon in her hair and clutched a stuffed toy close to her chest, but her gaze never left the shepherd. When the applause faded, Hayes knelt, unclipping the medal from its velvet box. He held it for a moment, his hand trembling, then leaned forward and clipped it to Rex's collar. The medal glinted under the lights, catching every eye in the room. The gym erupted again, people rising to their feet, clapping harder now, stamping their feet on the bleachers. Lily darted forward, pushing through the crowd until she reached him. She wrapped her small arms around Rex's neck, pressing her cheek into his fur, her voice shaking as she whispered for him alone. "You saw what no one else could," she said, her words soft but strong. Rex leaned into her, his body relaxing for the first time in days, his tail giving a slow, steady wag. Mark Ellison watched with tears stinging his eyes, his wife's words echoing in his memory, "Dogs know." He realized now that those words had been more than a saying. They had been a truth his daughter was alive to prove. Rex lifted his head then, his ears pricked, and let out one single bark, sharp and clear, the sound cutting through the cheers and settling into silence. It was not a warning this time, not a call for help, but a sound of justice, of triumph, of a hero who had never needed words to speak the truth. Thank you for watching this video of a dog's devotion. If you like this story, show your support with a like, and join us by subscribing for more inspiring stories like this one.